In the vast tapestry of the Force, a single thread pulled differently can reshape the entire pattern. On Naboo, as Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral pyre burned, the Jedi Council faced a choice about a 9-year-old slave boy who might bring balance to the Force. Instead of the warrior's path, they chose wisdom. Instead of combat, they chose investigation. This is the story of Anakin Skywalker, trained not as a guardian, but as a sentinel, and how that choice saved the galaxy from darkness. The speeders screamed through Coruscant's lower levels, their repulsor lifts howling against the perpetual smog that choked the industrial district. Anakin Skywalker, now 23 years old, leaned forward in the pilot's seat, his yellow-bladed lightsaber clipped to his belt, his eyes tracking the fleeing assassin 3 platforms ahead. The industrial sector was a maze of shadows and neon, where desperate beings fled from consequences and hunters learned patience. Unlike the headstrong warrior he might have been in another life, this Anakin didn't rush forward with reckless bravado. He calculated trajectories with the precision of an engineer. He observed patterns in the Force like reading star charts. He waited for the perfect moment when his quarry would make the inevitable mistake that all panicked fugitives made. The assassin's speeder wove between industrial platforms, leaving ion trails and fear in equal measure. But Anakin's Sentinel training had taught him to see beyond the obvious, to read the subtle Force disturbances left by conscious intent, to predict behavior through understanding rather than assumption. The lower levels of Coruscant were a world unto themselves, thousands of meters below the gleaming Senate towers, where rules mattered less than survival and information was more valuable than credits. Patience, young one. Let them think they're escaping. They're heading for the maintenance tunnels. I'm already there. Good, you've learned well. The speeder banked hard left, anticipating rather than following. 5 years of training under Master Plo Koon had taught him something the traditional Guardian path never could have offered. That sometimes the greatest power wasn't in the swing of a blade, but in the understanding of when not to swing at all. The assassin turned the corner exactly where Anakin had predicted, finding not empty air but a yellow lightsaber blade waiting, humming with patient inevitability. The chase ended not with violence, but with inevitability, the mathematical certainty of a well-laid trap. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This story, this alternate thread in the Force's infinite tapestry, didn't begin in these shadows. It began in grief, smoke, and the silence that follows funeral pyres. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you're enjoying this content so far, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch these videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could accomplish if everyone subscribed. We thank you all for your continued support. The year was 32 years before the Battle of Yavin, and the Jedi Temple on Coruscant had just said goodbye to one of its most maverick members. Qui-Gon Jinn's body had burned beneath Naboo's sky, his atoms returning to the Force that had guided him through life. The smoke had risen into clear blue atmosphere, carrying with it the last physical traces of a Jedi who had dared to challenge the Council's wisdom. In that moment of transition, Obi-Wan Kenobi stood before the Jedi Council requesting to train the boy Qui-Gon had discovered on a backwater desert world. The wheels of fate began to turn in a direction no one could have predicted. Master Yoda had been about to deny the request, not from cruelty, but from fear. Fear of the future, fear of prophecy, fear of what this unusually powerful child might become. Fear clouded everything in those days, even if the Jedi refused to name it. But before the ancient master could speak his denial, another voice rose from the circular chamber. Master Plo Koon stepped forward, his taloned hands clasped before him. His breathing mask created a rhythmic counterpoint to the silence that had fallen over the assembled masters. Perhaps the boy requires a different path. He has spent his life building and repairing. This is not the calling of a guardian. This is the path of a sentinel. The sentinel path is not for the impulsive, which is precisely why he must learn it now, while his mind is still malleable. Teach him that the Force flows through all things, circuits and crystals, life and logic alike. The council chamber held its collective breath. Small Anakin stood uncertain in robes too large for his frame, understanding nothing except that his future was being decided by people who barely knew him. And then, in a decision that would echo through decades, the council agreed. Anakin Skywalker would not become the aggressive warrior the hidden Sith Lord had been counting on. He would become something far more dangerous to darkness, a seeker of truth. The training was nothing like Anakin had imagined. Where he'd expected lightsaber drills and combat techniques, Master Plo Koon instead led him deep into the Jedi archives. The ancient library stretched impossibly far in every direction, databanks and holocrons creating corridors of accumulated knowledge that predated the Republic itself. It was here, among whispers of forgotten history and the scent of preserved documents, that Anakin's true education began. The archives were a cathedral of information, where silence was sacred and curiosity was the highest form of devotion. Master Plo Koon's breathing mask created a rhythmic counterpoint to their footsteps as they walked through corridors of light and data. Around them, holocrons hummed with stored knowledge from Jedi Masters dead for thousands of years, and ancient texts lined walls that reached toward ceilings lost in shadow. Young Padawans moved through the stacks like whispered prayers, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of holographic displays. A Sentinel is a Jedi who walks between worlds. We are investigators, engineers, watchmen. While Guardians defend and Consulars meditate, Sentinels seek to understand. But Qui-Gon said I would bring balance to the Force. Perhaps he was right, but balance is not a destination. It's a constant negotiation between opposing forces. Your first lesson: see the Force not as light or dark, but as a current flowing through all existence. Years passed in this way, measured not in battles, but in understanding gained. While in another timeline a different Anakin might have grown frustrated with meditation and restrictions, this young Padawan found himself captivated by mysteries his master unveiled. He learned to read the Force like an engineer reads schematics, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. He studied ancient Sentinel techniques, methods of investigation that could track a single person across entire planets, technologies that detected subtle distortions left by darkside practitioners. Under Jocasta Nu's patient tutelage, he discovered fragments of Old Republic Sentinel teachings, wisdom from before the modern order had crystallized into rigid hierarchy. His connection with droids deepened during these formative years. Where other Jedi saw them as tools or, at best, amusing companions, young Anakin perceived something more profound. He could feel the way the Force moved through their circuits, the patterns and probabilities that governed their decision matrices. It wasn't consciousness as organics understood it, but it was a form of life nonetheless. Mathematical, precise, beautiful in its own elegant way. To Anakin, the distinction between organic and mechanical life became increasingly blurred, both manifestations of the same universal force flowing through different mediums. One evening, as master and apprentice repaired an ancient astromech unit together in the temple's lower workshops, Anakin's hands moved with the confidence of a master technician despite his youth. His fingers traced power conduits and memory cores with intuitive precision that suggested something beyond mere technical skill. The Force flowed through his work, guiding connections and revealing malfunctions before diagnostic scans could detect them. He could sense where energy wanted to flow, where resistance created blockages, where systems yearned to function in harmony. Master, if the Force flows through machines, does that mean they're alive? Define alive. Aware? Capable of growth and choice? The astromech unit chirped suddenly, its optical sensor brightening as power coursed through newly repaired systems. Plo Koon's mask tilted toward his young Padawan, observing the way Anakin's expression softened with satisfaction at the droid's revival. It was a telling moment, one that revealed the fundamental difference between this Anakin and the warrior he might have become. Here was a boy who found joy in repair rather than destruction, in understanding rather than conquest, in creating harmony rather than imposing order. Then by your own definition, what do you think? And more importantly, never lose that perspective. The lesson was more profound than Anakin realized in that moment. He was learning to see life not as binary categories of organic and mechanical, light and dark, Jedi and Sith, but as a spectrum of existence where the Force flowed through all manifestations of order and complexity. It was 22 years before the Battle of Yavin when everything began to accelerate toward its inevitable collision with destiny. Anakin Skywalker, now 20 years old, stood in the Jedi archives with his master, staring at a mystery that would unravel the Republic itself. The holographic star map rotated before them, beautiful and precise, yet fundamentally incomplete. Something was missing. Not destroyed, but deliberately hidden. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood beside them, arms crossed, the tensions that might have existed between master and apprentice replaced by genuine friendship. Since Qui-Gon's death, they had walked parallel paths, Obi-Wan as a guardian, Anakin as a sentinel, each respecting the other's chosen role. Anakin's fingers danced across holographic controls with practiced ease, isolating gravitational patterns and orbital mechanics. His sentinel training had taught him to see what others missed, the empty spaces where something should exist, the absences that spoke louder than presence. It's gone. An entire planet, just deleted from the archives. But look here, the gravitational patterns, the orbital mechanics of surrounding systems. Something massive still exists in this space. Perhaps the planet was destroyed? No. Someone didn't destroy this planet. They erased its record. Look at the data integrity markers. This was a surgical deletion, not corruption. This was what years of Sentinel training had prepared him for, seeing the invisible evidence, the digital fingerprints left by those who thought themselves clever. His fingers moved with surgical precision through layers of archive security, pulling up timestamp markers and authorization signatures that most Jedi wouldn't have known existed. Sentinels understood that information was as powerful as any lightsaber, that battles could be won or lost in databases long before they reached battlefields. The deletion signature glowed before them, ancient and damning. It had been authorized approximately 10 years prior, and the authorization code itself was most disturbing. It belonged to a Jedi. Someone within the Order had forgotten an entire planet, and the question of why hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Kamino materialized from sheets of rain like a ghost returning to haunt the living. The world was endless ocean and artificial cities, where lightning split gray skies and water fell with the weight of judgment itself. Anakin stood on the landing platform beside Obi-Wan, feeling the Force swirl around them in patterns that made his Sentinel instincts scream warnings he couldn't yet articulate. Something was profoundly wrong here, hidden beneath layers of clinical efficiency and manufactured politeness. Kaminoans were tall and graceful, moving through their pristine corridors with the detached elegance of scientists observing specimens rather than greeting guests. Their Prime Minister welcomed the Jedi as if they'd been expecting them, because as the horrifying truth revealed itself, they had been expecting them. Someone had ordered an army using a dead Jedi Master's name, and the Kaminoans saw nothing unusual about this obvious deception. The army you ordered is nearly complete. 1 million units ready, with another million in development. We are almost efficient. Of course, we're here to inspect the progress. The Council is very interested in the delivery timeline. They toured the facilities in tense silence, broken only by the Kaminoans' proud explanations. Row upon row of development chambers held identical men in various stages of growth, clones bred for war, trained from decanting for absolute obedience. Anakin watched them through observation windows, his mind working like the machines he'd spent his youth studying. He observed the clone troopers training with identical precision, their movements synchronized in ways that suggested more than mere discipline. Beneath the surface efficiency, Anakin felt something else through the Force, a pattern woven into their neural architecture, subtle as whispered poison. It was there in the way they responded to commands, in the vacant spaces where free will should have flourished. These men were weapons, yes, but weapons with a trigger that only certain frequencies could pull. The realization settled over him like ice water. The Sith weren't just preparing for war, they were building a weapon that could be turned against the Jedi themselves. The Clone Wars erupted across the galaxy like a cancer metastasizing through healthy tissue, consuming worlds and lives with equal indifference. But while in another timeline Anakin Skywalker became a celebrated general feared across battlefields, in this reality he became something far more valuable to the Jedi Order and far more dangerous to its hidden enemies. Master Plo Koon had petitioned the Council for a special assignment, and the Council, finally recognizing the wisdom in his unconventional training methods, had agreed. Anakin would not lead troops on front lines where victory was measured in territory gained and lives lost. Instead, he would become a Jedi Shadow, a Sentinel specialization that operated in the darkness between battles, hunting for the true source of the conflict rather than fighting its symptoms. Together with Ahsoka Tano, a sharp-minded young Togruta Padawan whom Plo Koon had also taken under his protective wing, they formed Operation Dawnfire. Their mission transcended simple military objectives. They traced financial networks spanning the galaxy, political manipulations reaching into the highest levels of government, and dark side signatures connecting both Republic and Separatists to a single unseen hand. Their hidden base on Coruscant's industrial levels became a nerve center for intelligence that most Jedi never imagined existed, a place where data streams revealed truths that lightsabers could never uncover. This doesn't make sense, Master Skywalker. Why would corporations fund both sides of the war? What's the only thing that profits from perpetual conflict? The conflict itself. You're saying someone wants this war to continue indefinitely? The investigation revealed patterns that should have terrified the Senate. Every battle, every calculated victory and strategic defeat pushed more emergency authority toward the Supreme Chancellor's office. Democratic oversight was being systematically dismantled. Every major military contract, weapons manufacturer, and security firm traced back through layers of shell corporations to Sereno, Count Dooku's world. The Separatists were led by a former Jedi turned Sith Lord, and the Republic was defended by Jedi who didn't realize they were pieces being moved across someone else's game board. The investigation consumed 3 years of careful work, 3 years of connecting threads so subtle that any less patient approach would have missed them entirely. 3 years during which Anakin maintained his cover as a loyal Jedi while his small team of shadows slowly, methodically built an irrefutable case. The evidence accumulated like layers of sediment, each piece seemingly innocuous alone, but collectively revealing a picture of manipulation that staggered the imagination. During this time, Anakin reconnected with Padme Amidala, now a senator fighting desperately to preserve democracy. Their paths crossed naturally through this investigation. She had information networks and Senate access that proved invaluable. Their romance rekindled through this shared purpose, but not in desperate secrecy. This Anakin, trained in balance, courted her openly with the blessings of Masters Plo Koon and Yoda. The Jedi Code forbade possession, not love, and Anakin had learned the difference. "You're different from the boy I met on Tatooine. The Chancellor has more power than any elected official should possess. They taught me that the Force isn't about denying emotion, it's about understanding it. Every emotion is energy, the question is what you build with it. I'm scared, Anakin. There are whispers of making his emergency powers permanent." The breakthrough came not from dramatic confrontation, but from patient excavation through bureaucratic records. Anakin discovered encrypted communications hidden in the Senate archives, a place most Jedi never thought to investigate because it seemed so mundane. But Sentinels understood that the most powerful secrets were often hidden in the most boring places. These communications were coded in patterns that matched Sith linguistics, messages between Supreme Chancellor Palpatine and Count Dooku, between Palpatine and the Trade Federation, between Palpatine and operatives connected to Darth Maul. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, and absolutely terrifying. The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic was Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who had orchestrated everything. Anakin brought the evidence before the Jedi Council on a gray morning, with Coruscant's perpetual clouds hanging heavy and oppressive outside the temple's towering windows. The weight of what he carried went beyond data crystals and encrypted files. This was the revelation that their 1,000-year-old enemy had been sitting at the heart of the galactic power for decades, manipulating them all like puppets whose strings they couldn't even see. Masters Windu, Yoda, Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and others studied the data in profound silence that spoke louder than any outburst. The evidence spread before them in holographic displays, financial transactions, encrypted communications, coded orders that connected Palpatine to every major catastrophe of the last 15 years. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. These were Jedi Masters who had dedicated centuries of combined experience to protecting the Republic, and now they were confronting the reality that they were being deceived by the very system they swore to defend. Master Yoda's ancient eyes carried the weight of failure, of recognition that their arrogance and complacency had blinded them to what should have been obvious. Confirm this we must. Move against the Chancellor without certainty we cannot. Too grave the consequences are. I'll get you certainty, Master, but we already have more than enough evidence for an arrest. Every day we wait gives him more time to consolidate power. Then we move swiftly. If the Supreme Chancellor is indeed Darth Sidious, he'll sense our suspicion the moment we enter his presence. This isn't an investigation, it's a confrontation. Plans were made with the efficiency of warriors who had spent 3 years fighting a war they now understood had been manufactured against them. Anakin would not go alone to face Palpatine. This would not be a private meeting where manipulation could fester in shadows. Instead, he would bring Masters of the Jedi Council, Mace Windu, Kit Fisto, Agent Kolar, and Saesee Tiin. They would come with evidence, with witnesses, with the full authority of the Jedi Order behind them. The trap Palpatine had spent decades constructing was about to spring shut on its architect. The confrontation in Palpatine's office was nothing like the private manipulation that might have occurred in another timeline. Anakin came with 4 Jedi Masters, Mace Windu, Kit Fisto, Agent Kolar, and Saesee Tiin. He came armed with comprehensive evidence spanning 15 years of deception. He came prepared for exactly what would unfold. Palpatine had been sitting behind his desk reviewing legislative documents before they entered, his grandfatherly smile slowly fading as he registered the expression on their faces. For someone who had spent decades maintaining perfect control, that momentary recognition of exposure was almost satisfying. You're under arrest, Chancellor. Charges include conspiracy, murder, treason, and crimes against the Republic spanning decades. My friends, surely there's been some terrible misunderstanding. I've served the Republic faithfully. We have encrypted communications between you and Count Dooku, between you and the Trade Federation, between you and every Separatist leader. We know what you are, Darth Sidious. For one crystalline moment, just a single heartbeat, Anakin saw the mask slip completely, saw the ancient hatred burning behind those mild eyes, the dark side power coiled like a serpent recognizing its cage had finally closed, and then Palpatine moved with speed that defied his apparent age. Force lightning arced from the Chancellor's fingers like bottled malevolence, catching Kit Fisto before the Mon Calamari Jedi could fully activate his blade. The now Tolan Master convulsed and collapsed, his lightsaber clattering across polished floors. Agent Kolar fell moments later, his body thrown through the massive window to fall endlessly into Coruscant's depths, his screams swallowed by wind and distance. But Anakin wasn't fighting from anger or fear, or the desperate attachment that had destroyed him in another timeline. He fought from understanding. He'd spent years studying how the Force moved through systems, how patterns could be predicted and disrupted through precise application of knowledge rather than raw power. When Palpatine's lightning came for him, Anakin didn't merely block it with his yellow blade, he redirected it using Sentinel Force suppression techniques, grounding the lethal energy harmlessly into the office's electrical systems. Sparks cascaded from wall panels as circuits overloaded, the lights flickering dramatically. Mace Windu pressed forward with relentless precision, his purple blade a blur of Vapid technique that channeled the dark side's own energy back against its wielder. Sidious was forced backwards step by step, forced to defend rather than attack, forced into a tactical corner from which there was no escape through manipulation or deception. The ancient Sith Lord's carefully constructed plans were collapsing around him in real time, and for the first time in decades, genuine fear flickered across his distorted features. The air itself seemed to crackle with opposing energies, light against dark, wisdom against malice. Then Anakin did something unexpected, something that only someone trained to see the Force as patterns and systems could conceive. He deactivated his yellow lightsaber completely. Mace Windu's eyes widened in momentary confusion, but Anakin was already moving, though not in any way traditional Jedi combat would recognize. Not with his blade, but with his mind, with the deep understanding of systems that defined Sentinel philosophy. He felt the currents of the Force, the way Sidious drew on the dark side through decades of accumulated connections, the neural pathways of power linking the Sith Lord to his vast web of manipulation. You think you're clever, slave boy? You're still nothing but... I learned something slaves know that you will never. Patience, planning, the power of waiting for the right moment. And with surgical precision, Anakin disrupted those dark connections. It was a technique he'd developed himself, inspired by years of working with circuits and machines. If you understood any system deeply enough, mechanical, organic, or mystical, you could introduce calculated chaos at the precise pressure point where structure would collapse. Sidious's concentration shattered for just one crucial moment. Mace Windu's blade came down with finality, and the greatest Sith Lord in 1,000 years fell. But victory demanded its price. In his death throes, Sidious unleashed a final surge of Force lightning, raw, uncontrolled, spreading through the room like liquid hatred seeking any target. Anakin threw himself forward without hesitation, absorbing the blast to protect the other Jedi. The electricity tore through his body, burning nerves and leaving him convulsing on polished floors as Palpatine's life finally ended. Anakin Skywalker woke 3 days later in the Jedi Temple's medical center. His body was wrapped in synth flesh bandages, neural matrices working to heal the damage. Padme sat beside his bed, tears streaming down her face. When his eyes opened, her expression transformed from anguish to joy. Outside, Coruscant was changing. The war was ending as clone commanders received stand-down orders. Order 66 had been discovered and deactivated. The weapon Sidious had constructed was disarmed. You're awake! Oh, thank the Force. Sidious is dead. Order 66 was deactivated. The war is ending. You saved the Republic. Master Plo Koon entered, his breathing mask's rhythmic sound comforting. The Keldor Master observed his student with satisfaction. A gamble on an unconventional path had succeeded beyond imagination. The years that followed were not easy. Victory never granted paradise. Rebuilding took decades. Anakin became the architect of reformed Jedi philosophy alongside Masters Yoda, Plo Koon, and Obi-Wan. No longer would the Jedi be generals. They would return to their roots as peacekeepers and investigators. Anakin and Padme married openly. Their twins Luke and Leia grew up learning that balance meant embracing all aspects of life with understanding rather than fear. The prophecy had spoken of one who would bring balance to the Force. Perhaps it had been fulfilled through wisdom rather than destruction, through choosing to act with knowledge rather than ignorance, with compassion rather than hate, with patience rather than rage. In the end, balance was never about the color of one's blade, but about the choices made in the shadow between light and dark. And in those shadows, Anakin Skywalker had found not his destiny, but his purpose. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows of what might have been, remember to hit that subscribe button and join us for more explorations of the infinite possibilities within that galaxy far, far away. May the Force be with you, always.